In a snowy Chicago station, a mechanic's crucial train departs soon, but a stranger's plight sparks a thrilling, life-altering journey. Welcome to Life Bond Tales. Enjoy this heart-touching story and subscribe for more. The snow fell in soft, relentless flakes over Chicago's Union Station, turning the evening into a blur of white and gray as commuters hustled beneath the grand limestone arches. Jamal Carter, a 39-year-old black mechanic, stood just inside the Great Hall, his breath visible in the chilly air, his calloused hands gripping the handle of a faded canvas backpack. At 6'2", he moved with the deliberate grace of someone used to navigating tight engine bays, his work boots leaving faint wet prints on the marble floor. Tonight was no ordinary commute. In 22 minutes, the 6:45 p.m. Amtrak to Detroit would depart, carrying him to the most important interview of his life, a senior mechanic position at Great Lakes Auto, a company promising not just a paycheck, but a future. The job meant health insurance for his father's heart condition, a better school for his 12-year-old daughter, Aisha, and the chance to trade 16-hour garage shifts for a life with room to breathe. Jamal adjusted his scarf, the one Aisha had knitted last Christmas. Its uneven stitches a quiet reminder of why he couldn't falter. The station buzzed with purpose, businessmen in sharp coats, students with overstuffed bags, families herding, kids toward platforms. But Jamal's world narrowed to the overhead sign flashing Detroit, Track 12. He'd checked his ticket twice, his resume tucked neatly in a plastic sleeve, his phone at 78% battery. Every detail was accounted for, every second planned. He'd learned long ago that luck wasn't real. It was preparation meeting. Grit. Growing up on the South Side, he'd watched his father, a bus driver, rise at 4 a.m. to keep the family afloat, teaching Jamal that you build your own momentum. Tonight, that momentum felt like a current pulling him forward. He wove through the crowd, past a pretzel stand's warm, buttery scent, his eyes scanning for the escalator to Track 12. The clock above read 6:23 p.m. Plenty of time, he told himself, though his pulse quickened. He thought of Aisha's face this morning, her gap-toothed grin as she'd hugged him and said, "You got this, Daddy." He thought of his father, now too weak to leave the apartment, who'd whispered, "Make us proud, son." The weight of their trust sat heavy in his chest, not a burden, but a fire. As he neared the escalator, the crowd thickened, voices overlapping, announcements crackling, a baby crying, someone shouting about a delayed train. Jamal's focus held steady, his steps measured but urgent. He could see the platform now, the train's silver cars gleaming under fluorescent lights. Then, just past a row of benches, he saw her. An elderly woman stood alone, her slight frame dwarfed by 2 oversized suitcases and a duffel that looked ready to burst. Her coat was a faded burgundy, its hem frayed but clean, and her silver hair was tucked beneath a knitted hat, wisps escaping in the drafty air. She was trying to drag the largest suitcase toward a staircase leading to Track 8, her hands trembling with effort, her face etched with quiet determination. No one stopped. A woman in heels clicked past, eyes on her phone. A man with a briefcase muttered about the weather, barely glancing her way. The woman paused, catching her breath, and for a moment her shoulders sagged, not with defeat, but with the weight of being unseen. Jamal slowed, his hand tightening on his backpack strap. The clock ticked to 6:25 p.m. He could still make his train, dash up the escalator, flash his ticket, slide into a seat with minutes to spare. But something in the woman's face held him, a flicker of pride battling exhaustion, the same look he'd seen in his father's eyes when the hospital bills piled up. It wasn't just her struggle, it was the way she kept going alone in a world too busy to notice. He glanced at the sign for Track 8. It was the opposite direction, a 5-minute walk at least, maybe more with her bags. Helping her could cost him everything, yet his father's voice echoed in his mind. "You don't walk past someone who needs you, Jamal. Not ever." He took a breath, the cold air sharp in his lungs, and felt the current of his momentum shift, not stopping but redirecting, like a river finding a new path. He stepped toward her, his decision made before he could second-guess it, his heart already lighter despite the risk. The snow fell harder now, swirling in gusts that stung Jamal Carter's face as he stepped out of the stream of commuters in Chicago's Union Station, his boots squeaking against the slick marble floor. The elderly woman stood just beyond the benches, her burgundy coat a muted splash of color against the gray hustle of the Great Hall. Her name, he'd soon learn, was Clara Thompson, though for now she was just a stranger, struggling with two mismatched suitcases and a duffel bag that sagged under its own weight. Jamal's backpack felt heavier as he approached, not from its contents, a resume, a water bottle, a granola bar for the ride, but from the weight of the choice forming in his chest. The overhead clock read 6:26 p.m., 19 minutes until his Detroit-bound Amtrak left track 12, carrying his shot at a senior mechanic job with Great Lakes Auto. That job was more than a paycheck. It was a lifeline for his daughter Aisha, whose dream of art school hung on his ability to pay tuition, and for his father, whose heart condition demanded meds they could barely afford. Jamal, at 39, had spent 2 decades under hoods, his hands stained with grease, his back aching from long nights at the garage, all for moments like this one, a chance to rewrite their story. He'd planned every detail, the pressed shirt under his jacket, the ticket triple-checked, the route to the platform memorized. The station thrummed with chaos, announcements blaring, a violinist playing for coins, travelers weaving like schools of fish. But Jamal's focus had been laser-sharp until he saw her. Clara's hands, knotted with age, gripped the suitcase handle, her breath shallow as she tugged it toward the staircase for track 8. Her silver hair, escaping her knitted hat, danced in the draft, and her eyes, a pale green, held a mix of resolve and quiet shame, as if she hated needing help but couldn't deny it. No one else stopped. A man in a wool coat brushed past, muttering into his earpiece. A teenage couple, giggling over a shared phone, didn't glance up. The staircase to track. Fayette loomed ahead, its steps steep and unforgiving, and Jamal knew what helping her meant. Track 8 was a concourse away, a maze of corridors and crowds, a detour that could swallow his 19 minutes whole. His train wouldn't wait. Great Lakes Auto wouldn't reschedule. Yet he saw his father's face in his mind, the way he'd tip, his hat to strangers, the way he'd once given his last $20 to a neighbor facing eviction. "Kindness ain't free, son," he'd said, "but it's always worth it." Jamal's pulse raced, his eyes flicking to the clock, 6:27 p.m. He could still make it if he ran, if he ignored the tug in his gut, if he chose his family's future over a stranger's moment. But Clara stumbled slightly, the suitcase slipping. From her grip, and the sound of it hitting the floor was louder than the station's din. It was the sound of dignity cracking, of someone fighting to stand tall when the world pushed back. Jamal's feet moved before his mind caught up, closing, the gap in 3 strides. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but warm, "let me help you with those." Clara turned, startled, her green eyes sharp despite her fatigue, as if she wasn't used to being seen. "Oh," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I don't want to trouble you." Her smile was polite, cautious, like she'd learned to expect refusal. "No trouble," Jamal said, already lifting the largest suitcase, its leather worn but sturdy, the kind that carried stories. "Where you headed?" "Track 8, she said, glancing at a crumpled ticket. "The 6:50 to St. Louis." Jamal's stomach tightened. Track 8 was a 7-minute walk, maybe 8 with her pace and the bags. His train left in 18 minutes. He slung her duffel over his shoulder, its weight digging into his collarbone, and offered her his arm. "We'll get you there," he said, his smile masking the math running in his head. Clara hesitated, then took his arm, her grip light but firm. "You're very kind," she said, and something in her tone, gratitude laced with surprise, made his chest ache. As they moved toward the staircase, the crowd parted slightly, some glancing curiously, others oblivious. Jamal adjusted his pace to hers, her steps slow but deliberate, her breathing uneven. "Traveling for something special?" he asked, keeping his voice light to ease the tension in his own mind. "Just visiting family," Clara said vaguely, her eyes on the floor. "Though at my age, every trip feels like a pilgrimage." She laughed softly and Jamal chuckled, though his eyes darted to a digital sign, 6:29 p.m. They reached the staircase, and he hoisted the bags with practiced ease, his muscles honed from years of lifting engine blocks. Clara gripped the railing, her knuckles whitening, and he stayed close, ready to steady her. At the bottom, she paused, catching her breath, and looked at him with a mix of relief and guilt. "You're missing something important for this, aren't you?" she asked, her gaze piercing. Jamal shook his head, though his throat tightened. "Just a train," he said, forcing a grin. "Plenty more where that came from." But his heart pounded as they entered the corridor to track 8, the sounds of his own platform fading behind him. The clock in his mind ticked louder. 16 minutes. Left, then 15. He thought of Aisha sketching at the kitchen table, her pencils worn to stubs. He thought of his father, joking through the pain, saying, "You're my legacy, Jamal." The bags grew heavier, not from weight but from what they were costing him. Yet Clara's arm in his felt like an anchor, grounding him in a way he couldn't explain. They passed a coffee kiosk, its warmth tempting, and Jamal noticed Clara's lips were pale, her face drawn. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked, slowing. She nodded, but her hand trembled. "Didn't eat much today," she admitted, almost a whisper. Without thinking, Jamal steered her to a bench. "Sit here a second," he said, lowering the bags. He jogged to the kiosk, pulling out his last $10 and returned with a coffee and a scone. "For the road," he said, placing them in her hands. Her eyes softened, and for a moment neither spoke. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Jamal," he said. "And you?" "Clara," she replied, her smile warmer now. "Thank you, Jamal." They resumed their walk, the corridor stretching endlessly, the sign for track 8 still distant. The announcement for his Detroit train crackled overhead. Final boarding 6:45 to Detroit. And Jamal's chest tightened, but he didn't falter. Clara's steps grew steadier, as if his presence gave her strength. He didn't know her story, didn't need to. She was someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone who deserved not to be left behind. As they neared track 8, the platform in sight, Jamal felt a strange calm, like the quiet after a long shift when the work was done right. He'd made his choice, and though it might cost him Detroit, it hadn't cost him himself. The fluorescent lights of Chicago's Union Station buzzed overhead as Jamal Carter guided Clara Thompson toward track 8, her arm looped lightly through. Here's her suitcases bumping against his legs with every step. The corridor stretched like a tunnel, its tiled walls echoing the distant rumble of trains and the chatter of travelers. But Jamal's world had shrunk to the rhythm of Clara's slow, deliberate pace and the ticking clock in his mind. It was 6:38 p.m., 7 minutes until his Detroit-bound Amtrak left track 12, carrying his chance at a senior mechanic job with Great Lakes Auto, a job that promised stability, health insurance for his father's failing heart, and a future where his daughter Aisha could trade her worn pencils for art school. The weight of Clara's bags dug into his shoulders, the duffel's strap cutting into his collarbone. But it was the weight of his choice that pressed harder. He'd chosen to help Clara, a stranger whose green eyes held a quiet dignity despite her trembling hands, over sprinting to his platform. The announcement for his train crackled again, final boarding 6:45 to Detroit, and Jamal's stomach twisted, his pulse a steady drumbeat. He could still turn back, drop the bags, and run. Track 12 was a 4-minute sprint, if he dodged. The crowd if the conductor lingered, if luck bent in his favor. But Clara's grip on his arm, light yet trusting, anchored him. Her burgundy coat brushed his sleeve, its frayed hem a testament to years worn proudly, and her knitted hat sat slightly askew, silver wisps of hair catching the light. She'd said little since the bench, where he'd spent his last $10 on her. Coffee and scone, but her silence felt like gratitude, not distance. "Almost there," Jamal said, his voice steady, though his eyes flicked to a sign, track 8, 100 yards. Clara nodded, her breath uneven but her steps determined. "You're a good man, Jamal," she said softly, her words cutting through the station's noise like a blade. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Good wasn't the same as smart, and smart would have had him on that train, resume in hand, ready to charm Great Lakes Auto. Instead, he was here, missing his shot for a woman he'd never see again. His father's voice echoed, "Kindness ain't free, son, but it's always worth it." Jamal wanted to believe it, but the cost felt steep. His father's meds, Aisha's dreams, his own years of grinding for a break like this. At 39, he'd learned to trust his hands, his tools, his hustle, but trusting this moment felt like leaping blind. They rounded a corner and Track 8 came into view, its platform crowded with passengers boarding the 6:50 to St. Louis. The train's silver. Cars gleamed, doors open, a conductor checking tickets with mechanical precision. Jamal's heart sank as another announcement confirmed his train's departure. Now leaving 6:45 to Detroit. It was gone. He felt it like a door slamming shut, the sound louder in his chest than the station's din. Clara sensed his shift, her eyes searching his face. "That was yours, wasn't it?" she asked, her voice heavy with guilt. Jamal forced a shrug, setting her bags down near the platform's edge. "Was," he said, the word bitter but final. "But you're here now and that's what matters." He didn't believe it fully, but saying it kept him upright. Clara's lips parted, as if to protest, but she closed them, her gaze lingering on him, not pitying but seeing like she understood the sacrifice better than he did. He helped her to a bench, ensuring her bags were secure, and glanced at the platform clock. 6:42 p.m. Her train would board soon. "You're all set, Miss Clara," he said, adjusting his backpack, its weight a reminder of the resume he wouldn't need tonight. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a slim leather card holder, and pressed a business card into his hand. Her fingers, though frail, were steady. "Call this number tomorrow," she said, her tone firm, almost commanding. The card was plain white, with a handwritten number in neat cursive, no name, no company. Jamal frowned, turning it over. "What's this?" he asked. "A thank you," Clara said simply, her green eyes sharp, holding a spark he couldn't place. "Just promise you'll call." He nodded, slipping the card into his wallet, more to humor her than out of conviction. "I will," he said, though his mind was already drifting to the long night ahead. His phone at 15% battery, his wallet empty, the station's benches, his only bed. Clara stood, steadying herself on the bench, and joined the boarding line. Jamal watched her hand her ticket to the conductor, her small frame disappearing into the train's doorway. She turned once, raising a hand in a faint wave, and then she was gone, swallowed by the silver cars that pulled away with a low hum. The platform emptied, leaving Jamal alone. The air colder now, the snow outside still falling. He wandered back, through the corridor, the buzz of the station fading into a hollow quiet. His boots echoed, each step a reminder of what he'd lost. He thought of Aisha, waiting for good news, and his father, whose pride in him felt like a debt he'd failed to pay. Finding an empty bench near the great hall, he sank onto it, his backpack at his feet. His phone died as he checked the time, leaving him untethered. He pulled out Clara's card, tracing the handwritten number with his thumb. It felt like a lifeline. But to what? A kind gesture from an old woman, nothing more. Yet her eyes, that spark, stayed with him, like she'd seen something in him he couldn't. He leaned back, the bench's cold metal biting through his jacket, and closed his eyes. Just for a minute, he told himself. To rest. To not think about the interview, the job, the life that had slipped through his fingers. Sleep came fast, heavy, and when he woke the station was quieter, the snow outside a thick blanket under streetlights. His stomach growled, his joints ached, but Clara's card was still in his hand. "Call tomorrow," she'd said. He didn't know why, but those words felt like a promise, a thread pulling him forward when everything else had unraveled. For the first time since the train left, he felt a flicker of hope, faint but stubborn, like an engine turning over after a long stall. The snow had thickened outside Chicago's Union Station, blanketing the city in a hush that made the Great Hall's marble expanse feel like a cathedral after hours. Jamal Carter sat on a cold metal bench near the station's entrance, his canvas backpack slumped at his feet, his hands folded over Clara Thompson's business card, its edges worn from his restless fingers. The clock above read 11:47 p.m., hours since he'd missed his Detroit-bound Amtrak, hours since he'd watched Clara board her train to St. Louis, her parting gift, This plain white card with a handwritten number, his only tether to the days, unraveling. His phone was dead, its battery drained after a futile search for a charging outlet, and his wallet held nothing but receipts and Clara's card, his last $10 spent on her coffee and scone. The station, once a hive of motion, had quieted to a skeleton crew of late-night travelers and janitors, their mops scraping rhythmically in the distance. Jamal's breath fogged in the chilly air, his scarf, Aisha's Christmas gift, tight, around his neck, its uneven stitches a lifeline to home. At 39, he'd faced setbacks, layoffs, broken transmissions, hospital bills that outran his paychecks. But this felt different, heavier, like he'd gambled his family's future on a stranger's. Need and lost. The Great Lakes auto job was gone, the interview he'd prepped for. Resume polished, shirt ironed, answers rehearsed. Now just a ghost of what could have been. Aisha's gap-toothed grin flashed in his mind, her voice saying, "You got this, Daddy," and his father's frail hand squeezing his before he left, whispering, "Make us proud." He'd wanted to, God, how he'd wanted to, but pride didn't pay for art school or heart meds. His choice to help Clara replayed endlessly. Her trembling hands, her green eyes sharp with gratitude, the way she'd pressed the card into his, palm like it meant something. "Call this number tomorrow," she'd said, her voice steady, certain. But what could it be? A kind gesture from an old woman, maybe a connection to a low-level job, nothing that could match the stability he'd lost. Doubt gnawed at him, sharp and cold, whispering that he'd been reckless, that kindness was a luxury he couldn't afford. He leaned back, the bench's chill seeping through his jacket, and stared at the vaulted ceiling, its gold leaf glinting faintly under dim lights. The station felt like a limbo, a place between where he'd been and where he couldn't go. His stomach growled. A low rumble he ignored, and his legs ached from hours of sitting, but moving felt pointless. He'd sleep here tonight, he decided, on this bench or near the baggage claim, where the lights were softer and the guards less likely to prod him awake. Tomorrow he'd borrow a charger, call the number, face whatever came next. Maybe a bus, ticket home, maybe a long apology to Aisha and his father. The thought of their disappointment stung worse than the cold. He pulled the card out again, tracing the cursive digits, their loops oddly elegant for something so cryptic. Clara's face lingered in his memory, not just her age or her struggle, but the way she'd looked at him, not as a stranger, but as someone who mattered. "You're a good man, Jamal," she'd said, and he'd brushed it off, but now, alone, those words felt like a mirror, reflecting a part of himself he'd almost forgotten. His father had raised him to stop, to help, to see the person behind. The problem. That's who he was, who he'd always been, even when it cost him. But the cost this time was steep, and the card in his hand felt flimsy against it. He tucked it back into his wallet, next to a photo of Aisha at her school play, her face painted like a lion, fierce and bright. He closed his eyes, trying to summon her courage, but exhaustion pulled him under, his breath slowing as sleep crept in. Dreams came in fragments. Clara's green eyes, Aisha's laughter, the hum of a train he couldn't catch. When he woke, the station was darker, the clock reading 3:12 a.m., the snow outside a relentless curtain. His neck ached, his mouth dry, but something had shifted in him, a stubborn spark refusing to die. He thought of his father, who'd worked double shifts to buy him his first wrench set, who'd said, "Tools don't make the man, son, choices do." Helping Clara was a choice, one he couldn't undo, and regretting it felt like betraying the man his father raised. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and noticed a janitor nearby, an older man with a kind face pushing a cart. "You okay, brother?" the man asked, pausing. Jamal nodded, managing a small smile. "Just waiting for morning." The janitor tossed him a bottled water from the cart. "It'll come," he said, moving on. Jamal drank, the water cold and grounding, and felt the spark grow. Morning meant the call, the number, a chance, however slim, to make sense of this. He didn't know Clara's story, didn't know if her card led to a job or a dead end, but he knew he'd call because giving up wasn't in him. He thought of Aisha, sketching at the kitchen table, her dreams bigger than their apartments, peeling walls. He thought of his father, whose heart kept beating despite the odds, whose faith in Jamal never wavered. The station's quiet wrapped around him, not oppressive now, but patient, like it was waiting with him. He leaned back, the bench less cold somehow, and held the card again, not tracing it this time, but gripping it, like a key he hadn't yet turned. Clara's voice echoed, "A thank you." He didn't know what it unlocked, but for the first time since the train left, he believed it might matter. The snow fell on, the station hummed softly, and Jamal waited not for the train he'd missed, but for the dawn that would bring a new path, one he couldn't yet see but felt was there, waiting for him to step toward it. The dawn broke over, Chicago's Union Station in a pale wash of gold, the snow outside slowing to a delicate drift as Jamal Carter stirred on the metal bench, his neck stiff from a night of fitful sleep. His canvas backpack lay at his feet, a crumpled water bottle beside it, a gift from the janitor who'd passed hours ago. The great hall was waking up, commuters trickling in, coffee kiosks rattling open, the air sharp with the promise of a new day. Jamal's hands, rough from years of wrench work, clutched Clara Thompson's business card, its handwritten number in cursive loops a faint hope against the weight of his missed Detroit train. It was 6:03 a.m., and his phone, dead since last night, left him untethered, but the card felt like a lifeline, a mystery he was ready to unravel. He'd spent the night wrestling with doubt. Missing the Great Lakes auto interview had cost him a job that could have secured his daughter Aisha's art school dreams and his father's heart meds. But Clara's words, "Call this number tomorrow," echoed with a certainty that kept him from sinking. At 39, Jamal knew life didn't hand out second chances often, yet her green eyes, sharp and knowing, had seen something in him, something worth thanking with more than words. He stood, stretching his aching limbs, and scanned the station for a charging station. A corner near the ticket counter had an outlet, and after borrowing a charger from a sleepy barista, he plugged in his phone, watching the screen flicker to life. By 6:30 a.m., it had enough juice to make the call. His thumb hovered over the number, nerves twisting in his gut. What if it was nothing? A wrong number, a kind gesture with no substance? But Clara's voice, steady and deliberate, replayed. In his mind, "A thank you." He pressed call, the ring loud in the quiet station. A woman's voice answered, crisp and professional. "Horizon Transit, how may I assist you?" Jamal's breath caught. Horizon Transit was a name he knew, a company building eco-friendly trains, splashed across billboards he'd passed on his way to the garage. "I'm calling for Clara," he said, unsure if that was enough. "She gave me this number." A pause, then the voice softened. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Thompson is expecting you. Can you be at our downtown office by 9 a.m.? Jamal blinked, stunned. She knew his name. "Yeah," he managed. "I can be there." The call ended, and he stared at the phone, the spark of hope from last night flaring into something brighter. He grabbed his backpack, splashed water on his face in the restroom, and smoothed his wrinkled shirt, the same one he'd ironed for Detroit. The walk to Horizon's office, a sleek glass tower 10 blocks away, was brisk, the snow-dusted streets waking with the city. By 8:50 a.m., he stood in the lobby, its marble floors and soaring atrium a world apart from the garage's oil-stained concrete. A receptionist led him to the 22nd floor, where Clara waited in a conference room, her burgundy coat replaced by a tailored navy blazer, her silver hair pinned elegantly. She rose, her smile warm but commanding, her green eyes as sharp as yesterday. "Jamal," she said, extending a hand, "you look like a man who keeps his promises." He shook it, his calluses stark against her delicate grip. "Didn't expect to see you so soon, Ms. Clara," he said, a grin breaking through his nerves. She gestured to a chair, and as they sat, she revealed the truth. Clara Thompson was Horizon Transit's CEO, traveling incognito to observe operations, when Jamal helped her. "You chose a stranger over your own future," she said, her voice steady. "That's not common, and it's exactly what I need." She slid a folder across the table, its cover embossed with Horizon's logo, a rising sun over train tracks. Inside was an offer. Lead instructor for Horizon's new mechanic training program in Chicago, a role with a $75,000 salary, full benefits, housing support, and tuition aid for Aisha. We're training local talent to maintain sustainable trains, Clara explained. But it needs someone who understands engines and people. I believe that's you. Jamal's heart thudded, the words blurring on the page. This wasn't just a job, it was a purpose, a chance to shape lives like his own, to give others the tools he'd fought to earn. He thought of Aisha, sketching at their kitchen table, and his father, whose pride would light up at this. But doubt lingered. Could he lead, teach, step into a world so far from the garage? Clara seemed to sense it. I saw you yesterday, she said. You didn't just carry my bags, you carried my dignity. That's leadership. She invited him to visit the training facility, a short drive away, to see the work firsthand. By 10:30 a.m., they stood in a hangar-like space on Chicago's west side, its bays filled with sleek train components, diagnostic screens, and 20 young trainees, some barely out of high school, others older, like Jamal, hungry for a second chance. A young woman, her braid swinging as she adjusted a hydraulic valve, caught his eye. She reminded him of Aisha, focused and fierce. The facility's director, a wiry man named Luis, explained the program. 6 months of hands-on training, jobs, guaranteed for graduates. We need someone to guide them, Luis said, glancing at Jamal. Someone who's been in the trenches. Jamal walked the floor, touching a wrench left on a workbench, its weight familiar, grounding. He imagined himself here, not just fixing, but teaching, building futures. Clara watched, her silence giving him space to feel the possibility. By noon, they were back in her office, the folder open before him. Take your time, she said, but know this, you didn't miss your train yesterday. You caught a different one. Jamal looked out the window, Chicago's skyline sharp against the snow-cleared sky, and felt the weight of his choice shift, not a loss now, but a beginning. He thought of his father's words. Choices make the man. Helping Clara had been a choice, and it had led him here to a path he'd never imagined but felt right in his bones. The morning sun spilled across the west side of Chicago, casting long shadows over the Horizon Transit Training Center, its glass and steel facade gleaming like a promise kept. Jamal Carter stood at the center's entrance, a year after that snowy night in Union Station, his Navy Horizon uniform crisp, the embroidered Sun and Tracks logo above his heart, a quiet badge of purpose. At 40, he was no longer just a mechanic, but a leader, the lead instructor for Horizon's mechanic training program, shaping the futures of 30 trainees who filled the hangar with the clank of tools and the hum of ambition. The choice he'd made, helping Clara Thompson, missing his Detroit train, accepting her offer, had rewritten his story, and today, as he awaited her visit, he felt the weight of that choice like a warm hand on his shoulder. The facility buzzed with life. Trainees in coveralls troubleshooting a train's hydraulic system, their laughter mingling with the beep of diagnostic screens. Jamal's daughter, Aisha, now 13, thrived at a magnet school for the arts, her sketches framed in his office. His father's heart condition was stable thanks to Horizon's benefits. The folder Clara had given him, once a leap of faith, was now a reality. A program training local talent, many from neighborhoods like Jamal's, to maintain eco-friendly trains. He'd signed it that day in her office, the pen heavy but sure, driven by the memory of Clara's trembling hands, his father's lessons, and the trainees' hungry eyes. Now as a black SUV pulled into the lot, Jamal's chest tightened with anticipation. Clara stepped out, her linen blazer light against the summer air, her silver hair pinned neatly, her green eyes as sharp at 74 as they'd been that night. She moved slower, a slight lean on her cane, but her presence filled the space, commanding respect. "Jamal," she said, her smile warm, "this place suits you." He grinned, shaking her hand, feeling the same delicate strength. "Couldn't have done it without you, Ms. Clara." They walked the hangar, trainees pausing to nod, some whispering her name, Clara Thompson, Horizon's CEO, the woman who'd built this from a vision. A young trainee, Maya, approached, her braid swinging, holding a tablet. "Mr. Carter, can you check my diagnostics?" she asked, her confidence echoing Aisha's. Jamal reviewed her work, suggesting a tweak, and Clara watched, her gaze soft but assessing. "She's one of your best," Clara said as Maya returned to her station. "They all are," Jamal replied, pride in his voice. The hangar was his home now, its rhythm, wrenches turning, screens flickering, voices learning, as familiar as the garage once was. He'd grown into leadership, not just teaching torque and circuits, but listening, guiding, showing his trainees they were seen. Clara's offer had been more than a job. It was a calling, and he'd answered it with every late night spent refining lessons, every morning greeting his team with a nod that said, "You belong here." As they reached his office, a small space with Aisha's art and his father's photo on the wall, Clara settled into a chair. "You've built something real," she said, her tone carrying the weight of someone who'd seen dreams fail but knew this one wouldn't. Jamal leaned against his desk, the framed note from Clara. "Call this number tomorrow," beside his father's picture. "I had help," he said. "You saw something in me I didn't." Clara shook her head. "I saw what was already there, heart, grit, the kind of man who stops when others rush by." Her words landed deep, stirring the memory of that night. The snow, the suitcases, the train he let go. He'd chosen Clara over his future, not knowing she'd hand him a better one. Now, his trainees were graduating, securing jobs, breaking cycles of struggle. Maya would start at Horizon's main depot next month. Others were eyeing apprenticeships abroad. Jamal's life had stretched beyond survival. Aisha's school play last week, his father's laughter at dinner, moments he'd once traded for overtime. Clara rose, her cane tapping softly. "We're expanding," she said almost casually. "A new center in Detroit, it needs a director." Jamal's eyebrows lifted. "You offering me another choice?" She smirked. "Always." He chuckled, glancing at Aisha's latest sketch, a train under a starry sky. "I'll think about it," he said, meaning it. Clara nodded, satisfied, and as they stepped outside, the sun high now, she paused. "Jamal," she said, her voice low, "thank you for carrying my bags." The words hit like a heartbeat, simple but vast, and he saw that night again. Her. Trembling hands, his choice, the card that changed everything. "Thank you for finding me," he replied, his throat tight. She climbed into the SUV, her wave brief but warm, and drove off, leaving Jamal in the lot, the hangar alive behind him. He looked at his trainees through the glass, their hands steady, their futures bright. He thought of his father, who'd never walked past a soul in need, whose photo watched over him. He thought of Aisha, her dreams no longer out of reach. Somewhere, in another station, someone else might be choosing, rush or stop, self or stranger. Jamal's choice had been a spark, igniting a fire that warmed more than his own life. It had built this center, these futures, this moment where he stood. Not just a mechanic, but a builder of possibilities. The sun climbed higher, the day unfolding, and Jamal turned back to the hangar, ready to teach, to lead, to keep choosing the path that made him whole.